Ahoy! Today we're talking about the patch notes for patch 8.2 as well as the bonus balance. And there's actually a lot of stuff in this one that wasn't in the patch notes show. It's more fixes and changes that actually have a pretty significant impact on the game in some regards. So we're gonna go through that as well. So there's a lot of interesting stuff here aside of what we already know from, well, the live show. So let's begin. We're gonna start with 8.1 with the bonus update and then go through the rest. Here are the skins. You can look at them on the patch notes if you want to see them in detail. Heimdall, Thoth, Pele, and Achilles. And I also zoomed in a little bit more so you can read along this time. Apparently that was a bit of an issue for some people before. So hopefully this is a better size now, let me know. So the first thing that is happening is a nerf to Conduit Gem. I don't think this surprises anyone really. It's a bit unfortunate because I'm already working on a mage starter video, which I probably still release and then just add some notes in the video itself for the changes, because it's like almost finished. But anyways, this comes with MP5 being decreased by 5, which makes perfect sense because I think they could decrease that by even more, since it's a lot of MP5 in early laning, especially if you get Tiny Trinket along with it, which most people do. I think it's Tiny, is it Lost Artifact? Whatever, the one that goes to the Doom Orb. So yeah, it's a ton of early MP5 for abilities, so you don't really need mana pots much, a lot. And it's not really what Conduit Gem is meant to do. That's actually what the Sand Starter is meant to do. So it makes sense that they decrease that. And the power going down by 5 as well, which, yeah, it's not going to change much because it still has that extra true damage, which is really where the value is. But it's going to slightly, ever so slightly, decrease some characters clear. Archmage's Gem gets a nerf as well. This is more significant, with the scaling per stack going down from 2.5% to 2%, down from a maximum 50% to 40%, which is just a fair bit less nuke. This is 40% off your magical power as damage before mitigation. So this is, or before protections. So this is definitely still a good item after this. But it's gonna be interesting because I think Gem of Focus is already underrated. And I think Gem of Focus will see more competition with Archmage's Gem being nerfed specifically as well. But we'll talk about that in a future video where I compare all of them side by side, all the upgrades for damage specifically. And another one of those that's also being changed here is Pendulum of Ages. So there are two changes here. I'm going to start with the second one. The magical power per 10% of available mana is increased from 7 to 10, which means it's a total of 100 extra power at full mana, whereas before it was 70. I think the total power of the item with that is like 180 or 190, which would make it a very high power starter or item in general. I think it's well, somewhere around there anyways. So that should be interesting. Actually, let me look that up. I'm pretty sure I had that on another tab anyways. Maybe not. Oh, unfortunate. And I think the other part is a bit weird, because the other part is where we see the cooldown reduction being increased from 10% to 20%, which technically makes sense, right? You start the game with 10% cooldown reduction and you build CDR boots, and then you build some CDR, and then you build this later and you get full CDR. The problem is, you're building this item on guards that benefit from CDR, obviously, because it has CDR from the start, so that's the big benefit here. If you're playing a guard that wants CDR from the start of the game, then you want to probably get a lot of CDR very quickly. So if you are a, whatever, Chang'e or Aphrodite, I don't think you want to wait until late game to get full CDR, which is another problem with Bamba's Hammer as well, which basically does the same thing, where you want to get CDR early on those cards that utilize it well, but you kind of have to wait if you don't want to overcap. So you end up in a situation where you can, for example, build this in Chronos Pendant, and then you have maxed out CDR. But then if you build CDR boots before, you're already overcapping, because this goes from 10 to 20%. If you're building, say, Spear of Desolation and CDR boots, then you're okay. Or if you're building Soul Gem, then you're also okay. But it's just this weird in between where usually you want these other CDR items, you want multiple of them as well, because they come with other benefits that work in tandem with the CDR, and you can't get that without overcapping. You can obviously like sell your boots late game and get the CDR on that one and then trade that off, and it would be okay. But usually I think with most mages anyways, this is not really ideal. The counterpoint here would be that Rod of Tahuti is built after boots, and then you build one CDR item, and then maybe the next item that you could build around that point might already be Pendulum of Ages, depending on how the game goes. If you build like not into CDR in the next item immediately, that would be an option. Which, yes, makes sense, but the problem is that Rod of Tahuti will get a nerf. So that argument may fall apart a little bit. We'll get to that. So I think this is still an awkward change. I wish this would have something different as a passive rather than just pure power and now more CDR. It just feels a bit weird. It feels like a weird breastplate type of item, you know, where you'd think like it doesn't really have a passive or Joltons, it just has a lot of stats. And that's strange for a late upgrade, but then again, it has a lot of power now. Mannequin Scepter gets a nerf, no surprise here. Yeah, everyone predicted that. The physical protection of the item goes down from 15 to 10, fair enough. The bonus damage goes down from 16 to 12, and the jungle damage is increased from 3 times to 4 times. Now, I have a problem with this. I think mannequins absolutely needed nerfs, and I can absolutely see the problems with it, but I'm not really sure if this tackles them. Because what you would what you do with mannequins in solo specifically, where it's the biggest problem in my opinion, is you can aggress heavily because you have that mitigation. And we can skip ahead here a little bit because mannequin also shows up in the other changes, where here we will now see in the 8.2 patch we'll see some damage fix, but also the attack speed slow going down from 7% to 3.5%. We'll talk about that more when we get to that point. But what you can see is what's getting limited very heavily is the boxing capability of the item. What is not really limited that much is the clearing benefit of it. Somebody like Osiris with AoE, someone like Bellona can still very easily apply this to multiple targets and get massive clear advantage. And I think what this item really needs is a removal of the cleave part. Like, it's just so that it doesn't proc on cleaves. The same way that, for example, Death Toll only procs to a reduced rate of cleaves. You just say Mannequin doesn't work with cleaves. Because then it wouldn't be such a heavy clear advantage, which kind of offsets everything else. Because right now, you're clearing very quickly with this, and then you're pressuring the enemy with the mitigation that you have. Like, sometimes you can even pressure them in the wave because you don't really care as much about the damage. And the bonus damage that you apply, and obviously the attack speed reduction, so they can't really box back if their attack speed's focused. So, while they keep the jungle clear the same, what's happening is they're nerfing the damage of the item against guards, which means that junglers who use this item for early aggression will also deal less damage to guards. And that makes it questionable if you're gonna pick this up on a jungler. Because a big point with Mannequin Scepter is that for most characters, not all, but for most, the upgrades aren't really that great. They are okay, but usually there's something better for you there. And obviously exceptions exist here, right? I'm not saying this is like a set in stone rule for everyone, but just generally speaking. And if you make the early game version so that it's not really worth picking up for junglers in terms of aggression, only for clear, then I don't think most junglers will value it over either Eye of the Jungle or Bombas at some point anymore, since they just offer more for you in many situations. And in the same sense, like there's gonna inevitably be the point where it's getting pushed out of other roles because it's just not gonna be effective enough anymore. But I don't think that's the best way to go about this balance-wise. I think they should keep the damage the same, but entirely remove it from cleaves. You can definitely look at the physical protection and the mitigation. I think the mitigation has some purpose for like early aggression as a jungler as well. If you aggress into a wave, I think that's intended. But I think taking away the cleave, but actually keeping this damage like the same as it is instead of reducing it would be the better choice for Mannequin in the long run, because it takes away a lot of the solo pressure that the item has right now, while still not making it completely useless if you really want to use it, but you really have to commit to it, and you have to commit to a weaker late game through that potentially. So I would prefer that. I am not really a fan of how they're handling the nerf. At the same time, I'm very happy that Mannequin is getting nerfed because the item very clearly needs nerfs. It's gonna be complicated to make this something that is usable or good in jungle, maybe usable in other lanes, but not overwhelming, because like the stats having to be so separated for both would be very complicated as well. Like having everything just apply in the jungle or something is just awkward, even though they've kind of done that with Protector of the Jungle. The other item is the Bluestone upgrade, Bluestone Brooch, now providing 200 health. I actually forgot to look that up. I'm just going to do that real quick. I'm pretty sure it doesn't have any health at the moment at all. So I think it's just a flat, just a flat 200 health, along with 45 physical power as well. So this is still an aggression option, obviously, because it doesn't have that many defensive stats. But 200 health is a massive buff for this item. And the alternative option is then going to be the one that is very aggression focused and maybe more for set or for carries and stuff like that. So I think very interesting. I think this is potentially gonna bring Bluestone up in value a little bit, but it still struggles in the early stages because it just comes with HP 5 and MP 5 and a little bit of power and no real protections compared to the other starters. And it goes on where we get to why it's even like why it'll struggle. So Warriors X gets a nerf, which actually buffs Bluestone in return, and which also buffs Mannequin in return, which is kind of really weird, right? So you see that Mannequin is getting its bonus damage reduced here from 16 to 12. But factoring in the 4 ticks of Warriors X mitigation, if you were building Warriors X against Mannequin, then nothing really changes. Actually, I think you end up dealing more damage because of it's split into 4 ticks of 4 damage, which were reduced by 2 before. So it was 8 damage before, and then plus protections or whatever. So maybe less even. And now it's 12 damage minus protections. So this is just some napkin math right here. I might be off, but I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen. I'm pretty sure even though this is getting nerfed, with Mannequins, you're going to deal more damage against someone using Warriors X than before, while still having the mitigation, the slightly reduced protection. I see that as a very risky approach. I understand why Warriors X is getting nerfed though, because Warriors X is extremely good still, especially in higher levels of play. It's very valued already. It's like, if you're not building Mannequins, you're building Warriors X, since it brings that old safety back that was specifically removed. It brings back the old stalemate lane where everyone is just safe farming, and yeah, now it's just back to not having that. And what's interesting with Warriors X, of course, is that the upgrades are very good as well, so that gives it more value. The health is increased from 50 to 75 here, which is like a little bit of an offset, but not nearly as good as the flat damage reduction on everything beforehand. So in the majority of cases, this will be weaker now. Sundering X will also no longer have any flat damage reduction, which I find interesting. Apparently, I mean, it's doing well, and that's why it's being nerfed, but I thought that on the upgrade, it would not really be an issue in late game, since, you know, Mannequin's upgrade has that as well. But apparently so. I'm surprised about the Sundering nerf, more so than the Warriors X nerf. I would have thought they tackle this completely differently, so it stays a counter to Bluestone and Mannequin, but maybe they don't want that because there is another starter for that, and that's what we're getting to now, which is Warding Sigil. Warding Sigil comes with that up to 10 mitigation, essentially, flat mitigation, and now provides 10 physical protections as well. This is very interesting because, let me check the stats here as well, just to be sure, but now it's essentially very close to Sundering X. I think Sundering X, to Warriors X. So yeah, Warriors X comes with 15 physical protection and 10 magical protection, and Warding Sigil will now come with 10 physical protection and 15 magical protection. So it's slightly switched up between the two, but only really slightly. I think it's 5 protections at the end of the day. It's not gonna be a crazy difference anyways. You also get the same health on both now. It's 75 on each. You get it buffed up here on Warriors X, reduced on Warding Sigil. And then the main difference between them will really be the passive, which is really interesting, right? Because again, I've showed this on PTS with Camazotz already. You can trade very well into someone using Bluestone because their ticks get drastically reduced, and the same is true for Mannequin to some degree. The problem is really that you don't have any build and sustain. I think this item could make use of like 5 HP 5 or something Just something to give it a little bit of extra sustain in lane when Warriors X, for example, has that constant lifesteal. And Bluestone has that massive HP 5. But I still think there's more use cases for it now. And I'm very happy about that because I think it was weird that it was niche as a mage counter in solo when really it can be both. So very happy with this change, very good one in my opinion. Might actually bring this item up a fair bit. It depends a lot on how popular especially Warriors X remains, because it doesn't really do all too much against Warriors X specifically. Then you're looking more at the upgrades, of course, like if you want a Sundering X or do you want Infused Sigil. You probably don't want an Infused Sigil, spoilers. They decrease the stack count to detonate from 5 abilities to 4, so you only have to be hit by 4 enemy abilities. And they increase the detonate damage from 400 to 500 magical power, which again is before mitigation, so really this isn't much, that is all the item does. And if the enemy procs at a range, it's not going to hit anyone, and I don't think it's going to significantly change in any regard. So I don't think this item is great. I still don't think it is. Maybe it's good against Tiamat because she uses so many abilities. I don't know. I don't think so. I really don't think that Infused Sigil as a concept is what you want on a soul lane. I think it needs something else, like some mechanic that makes it more appealing in one way or another before it gets used, but that's just me. Sigil of the Old Guard, on the other hand, now provides 30 physical protection as well. This is very interesting. It already provided a lot of magical protection before. It provides a lot of mitigation for being hit by abilities, and now it provides physical protection as well. I think that is one to look out for. Since it has like a massive amount of damage reduction now, and if you combine this with like even more damage reduction focused items, it could be very, very interesting. The awkward part again is you really want to build this with Oni Hunters, I think, if you really want to go hard on the damage mitigation. And they both come with primarily magical defense. This has some physical defense now, but you still need something else for defense at least. But I like that they buffed this up. I think this is going to be a pretty valuable defense choice for many characters now. Which I don't know how quickly we'll see it, because the value here of Sundering X is so high, but with the flat damage reduction being removed, maybe that'll already be enough. So I really like the changes here to these items. For the most part, I'm just a bit surprised about Warriors X, and we'll see how that plays out. War Flag gets a price reduction, which I think is fair. It's just like the support starters in general. Same goes for Benevolence, all down to 600 here, so they compete better with each other, that you can choose your other items to go along with that, and I think that's reasonable. I think they all are around the same level of in terms of what they provide. Really, you take in trade-offs with each of them anyways. And Sentinel's Embrace gets a nerf. Both the protections shared between allies on the passive reduced from 120 to 100, so if you're with one ally, it's 50 each. So I think that's good. I think that's reasonable. I think Sentinel's Embrace was just too crazy. I think it's still going to be a strong item. I also think that maybe Compassion as a competitor will be more interesting, which it should be, because Sentinel's Embrace was just completely overwhelming and you couldn't even fight into carries in late game. Compassion now provides 40 magical protection. This is interesting. This doesn't provide any physical protection. It's just magical protection. And now they have 40 of that. Like, from nothing to 40, that's a lot. Especially because the item comes with a fair bit of health, which is 300 health as well. So what this does, effectively, is it reduces the damage that gets transferred to you, because the damage that gets transferred to you from your allies is always in magical damage. So even if you don't have any other magical defense, then you will already take less damage from that. If you build more magical defense, you'll obviously take even less damage. I think that's very cool. I think that's shaping the item to be a more interesting contest between these two, really. And I'm going to do the numbers soon, because now it's actually worth doing them, since now there is more of a reason to build into Compassion. There's more of a reason to build into Benevolence in the first place, outside of the meme that we're getting to. So I'm very happy with this change as well. And we might actually see some Compassion. We might see some compassionate smite, guys. Really. Animosity. Animosity no longer deals bonus damage to structures. We had this coming. That's all I'm gonna say. It's a meme, yeah. It's funny. It's funny to run down structures like that. It's annoying, and it actually worked on ADCs and stuff as well. And now it doesn't, and that's good. And now the item is actually fine in my opinion. I don't think it needs any further nerfs or anything. Now it's a niche item where you sacrifice things in early to get this in late game, get this effect, which can be worth it on some, and not necessarily on everyone. And I think that's very justifiable. So that's all I'm gonna say on it. And I'm glad this change was made, and I'm very curious to see how like the best users for it work out now, like especially Erling Shen, honestly. So yeah, let's see. Death Temper increased the range at which you gain stacks from fallen enemies from 30 units to 80 units. I am glad I haven't made my ADC starters video yet, because that changes a fair bit, I think. Maybe. Possibly. Because this was just useless before, and it just, 30 units range as an ADC is just pointless because you're not killing enemies at 30 units range. And now it may actually have use cases. So let's find out about that soon. Run of Tahuti. Decreased magical power from 160 to 140. Yeah, you guys had that coming. Everyone was running Run of Tahuti right after Boots. Even on PTS I already did that. Somebody complained about like, why are you doing that? I'm like, well, because it was really, really good. And now I think there might be more interesting alternatives. I think especially, well, the problem is that the MP5 on the tier 1 is still really valuable and early, so that may still keep it popular. But I think other items technically would have more of a reason to be considered now. I think especially something like XP After Desolation, which is also very strong at the moment, would have more of a reason to be considered now. Then again, tier 1 is still really, really good, and that might just end up like leading to people building Wrath of Tahuti anyways. We'll find out. But I do think this is a reasonable nerf by 20 power, but then it also feels a little bit weird because it was such a super late game item, and now it's got lower power for a super late game item, but then again it has the extra pen, so we'll take those. Then we have some guard changes. Set Skewer base damage decreased from 85 to 285 to 85 to 265. So 5 off per rank, starting from the second rank. This is basically mainly a nerf to his mid game, a little bit of a nerf to the late game as well. And the same thing we're seeing with Kingslayer drastically, I would say 45 healing to 85, now down to 35 healing to 75. We just take a flat 10 off that. Both reasonable nerfs to Set, because Set was very strong. I think that Set will continue to be very strong, especially with certain builds at the moment. I think he has got a lot of potential in multiple lanes. And yeah, that's all we need to say. I think Set's still very good. But I think these nerfs are also very reasonable. Cupid. Cupid actually one of the best ADCs, but not the best one. I'm a bit surprised that he's getting hit here before Apollo, since Apollo is performing better in every rank that we can see so far. Like I think the top 3 ADCs right now are Apollo, Cupid, and Danzaburou. Not sure about the order, but Apollo's first. And Cupid is specifically performing better on higher ranks than Danzaburou. So yeah, I can see why this change is happening, but Apollo is just performing well everywhere. So I'm not sure why he's not getting changed. Anyways, Cupid gets a hard bomb change here, decreasing the scaling from 80 to 75. So 10% reduction on both of the procs combined. And Fields of Love gets its cooldown increased from 90 to 100 seconds. Very strong ultimate, very strong teamfight ultimate, and very strong disengage tool as well. Like just if the enemy comes to you and drop the field, and they probably don't want to walk through that. And obviously some damage of the hot bomb here. Very reasonable changes that will not destroy him, but take him down a notch, and I think that's still fair. I think his nerfs might actually end there for a while, and they might just see how he goes again, because his win rate is high, but it's not insanely absurd. We'll have to see how he competes like on the highest level of play once we have more Masters players, more statistics from that. That might be the reason why he eventually maybe gets another nerf. But for now, he might just stay with these nerfs. We'll see. And now we get to the other part of the patch, which are the 8.2 changes, which starts with Tiamat, of course. I'm gonna drink something in between. Because we're gonna talk a lot. So, first of all, we're going to go through Tiamat's abilities here, but I'm not going to go super in depth and compare them because I want to do that in a separate video since this is just a lot. And I want to talk about her damage compared to other gods. I want to talk about cooldowns and everything in detail, just to give you a bit of perspective there. But yeah, I don't think we can cover all of that in this video. This is going to be a much more detailed numbers breakdown, so I think that's probably going to come tomorrow. So the passive here is Death Begets Life. While in flying stance, Tiamat gains health from nearby ally and enemy death, less from minions. So you get a 40 plus 8 per level heal from guards, from guard death of either. 8 per level would be, what do we got? 160, 200 healing for an ally or enemy death. And with minions, you'd get 5 plus 0.5 per level, which might make up to 15 per minion at max level. But more important, like on the early ranks, really, where you really want that sustain, you get like 5 per minion, 5, 6, 7-ish. In ground stance, she gains up to 5 hardened scales, damage mitigation that breaks after a certain amount of damage is taken. Normal minions do not provide hardened scales. So this is a little weird because it's not fully specified. It definitely applies to guards. So guard deaths. It applies to another ability that can provide you with hardened scales, which we get to. I'm not entirely sure what it means for jungle camps because it just says normal minions. It doesn't say anything about jungle camps. If you could get a lot from that. And it's also not entirely clarified how these last. I'm not sure. I haven't. Maybe I have to look at the patch notes again. Again, that's when we go into more detail with her. I'm not sure what happens, for example, if you swap stances back, if you lose all the hardened scales, which would be, making a massive difference. Because these scales come with 60% mitigation. However, the scales have a limit. The scales have a shield limit each of 50 plus 10 per level, so up to 250. That is still a lot of mitigation, don't get me wrong, and she can get more mitigation. That's pretty crazy. But at the same time, when the shield is expired, when the shield's over, then the mitigation will no longer apply. So she's not constantly super tanky, but rather she either gets a lot of stacks quickly, or there will just be brief phases in the fight where she gets a stack, and then she is more tanky, and then she's less tanky again and more tanky again, which I imagine might be hard to play around, especially, if you get caught up by surprise. And suddenly she's super tanky and you think you're winning the fight, and then suddenly through something she gets extra stacks. That would hurt. The next one here is, the first ability rather, is Primordial Onslaught. She gathers power and fires orbs of energy at the end of a channel. So this ability is a wind up. Each orb damages enemies and stops on enemy guards. So it can clear a minion wave, but enemies can block it. Hitting the same enemy deals 50% less damage each time, to a minimum of 70% reduction. This ability can fire additional projectiles at ranks 3 and 5. So the damage goes from 60 to 100 plus 55% of your magical power. Mana cost is 55 to 75 and 10 seconds cooldown. I actually wanted to put this side by side with the Ra, and I did that to see how much this is like in comparison. So on rank 1, let me check back on that. On rank 1, you just do 60 damage plus 55% scaling, whereas Ra would do 95 damage plus 100% scaling. So I think Ra's damage with the reduction applied to the second one might be like around the same-ish. One has a slightly higher base damage, and the other one might be slightly higher scaling or something. But anyways, it'll be roughly, very roughly the same as a Ra beam, maybe slightly more. No, actually, probably slightly more. But yeah, it is also something that has to charge up first. It's also something that's body blockable if you want to, and then you can basically entirely block a clear. It comes with the same cooldown. So I think that puts it in perspective quite well. And then later, obviously, you have to charge a lot in order to get all the extra shots. But you can also do pretty significantly increased damage. If the numbers here add up with what I'm assuming, like how it works, it would be 380 base damage, whereas Ra's 1 and max ranks would be 335 base damage. But the scaling difference, it would be more like 200% scaling, with Ra's beam is more like 100% scaling. So this would technically do a fair bit more damage. The question is, how reliably can you confirm all the orbs anyways on a moving target? Because they take quite a while to fire. Your enemy may juke them, and then you don't hit all of them. So it's very hypothetical, right? And you can't really do anything else while you're firing them either. So yeah, it's gonna do pretty decent ramp up damage at some point, but it's still somewhat conditional. And yeah, I think Hi-Rez already said that they think that the earlier ranks of this ability will make it relatively hard to clear, and you're not going to be like a super early pressure mage. And I trust them on that judgment. I think, especially how like based on how other abilities work as well, I don't think she'll have the craziest early pressure by any means. The second ability is Ruination, which is an AoE in a triangle shape, around a triangle shape, with an inner area and outer area. Inner area deals, outer area deals 40 to 100 damage plus 30% scaling, and the inner damage is an additional, I think, or is it separate? Well, it doesn't even specify. Well, 60 to 200 plus 40% of your magical power. Now, this is interesting. I actually assume that this adds together, but now I'm not even sure anymore if this is combined damage or separate. We'll find out, but either way, 1 second stun, not very long, not enough to actually wind up your one and lock an enemy on that. So really just a quick CC with a 16 to 12 second cooldown, relatively normal, averaging mana cost. So this, I think, can't hit a full wave. I think this only hits half a wave, which can obviously help with clearing. But yeah, I don't think it's what you're going to primarily use. I think the one is going to be your first ability to level up. Grounding Dive is her leap. That is also her stance change, which gives you 1 stack of hardened scale. So if you go into the defensive farm, you immediately get 1 stack of hardened scale with that extra mitigation also. You're not like super at risk the moment you jump in. This is also nice for escaping because you get some protections the second you escape. This comes with a low mana cost of 40, and the cooldown scales quite heavily. It starts at 22 seconds and goes down to 14 seconds, which makes me think you might possibly level the second before you even level the 2. Since the 2 also gives you some cooldown reduction, but it's primarily some extra damage. It doesn't really increase the CC, whereas the stand swap just allows you to use a lot more abilities overall. So I would imagine that this might be more effective. And then you have the ultimate, which in itself is honestly not an ability. Like, there's some discussion going on at the moment if she has 11 or 10 abilities. This doesn't have a mana cost, this doesn't have a cooldown. This is just basically a toggle that you switch over to use another ability, and then that ability's use also puts this ability on cooldown. So I don't think it's really an ability, it's more like a toggle to me, but yeah, look at it whichever way you want to. And then if you use the Children of Creation, this is only in the mage stance, you can use one of the 3 summons. The first one is Summon Serpents, and Summon Serpents is huge, and I didn't quite catch just how huge this is on the patch notes show. So let's go through this. So she places a Pit of Creation, which spawns serpents of Tiamat that act like minions, traveling down lanes and attacking nearby enemies. 2 serpents spawn every 10 seconds, and the deployable creates 3 waves before disappearing. Enemies hit by the serpents have their damage done reduced. You can also stand on the pit to destroy it early. So what you likely do is you probably put this pit somewhere under a tower or in base or whatever, somewhere where the enemy can't stand on it. What I don't know here is, it doesn't actually show any of the cool, no, it does show the cooldown. Yeah, I don't know how these separate cooldowns work. They all have the same cooldown value, so I'm assuming they share a cooldown, but I don't know what happens with the spawner. So I wonder what happens if you put down the spawner, and it's one of the minions, if in that time you can already summon something else, or if the spawner basically holds off the cooldown. I'm assuming it doesn't hold off the cooldown, so you can technically have multiple beasts, which would be very interesting. But the big deal with this thing really isn't, it's not like, yeah, it's 10 damage plus 8% magical power, maybe that'll adjust that at some point, who knows. And these things only have 2 hit points, which means they don't really tank that much. They tank a little bit more from minions because they can take 3 hits from a minion, whereas like guards can blow them up in 2 hits. But still, like, it's two of them attacking you, which is kind of like Bastat's cats, I guess. But you have less control over them. But the more important part here is the damage reduction. These guys can apply 10% to 30% damage reduction, and I think this might be a reason to max the ult just alone. Because this reduction gets applied on top of the reduction that you can get from your hardened scales. And if you are fighting someone in your lane, in solo or in middle lane, you just wait for some serpents to be spawned and clear the wave at that point and engage on them. And if they choose to trade you, and the serpents are around, then they will get aggressed on by the serpents and they will get up to 30% damage reduction, which is massive. 30% is huge. You can also spawn this like late game in a team fight where everything is all over the place anyways, and they might just end up hitting the right target and saving your allies that way. So it is a gamble, but they also spawn consistently every 10 seconds, and they deal extra damage and they clear a little bit, so nothing to complain about there. And then they also come with this huge damage reduction effect, which I think is very interesting and maybe one of the strongest parts of Tiamat's kit, actually, depending on how well we'll be able to utilize that. The next one is Summon Beast. Oh yeah, by the way, cooldown here, 46 seconds, goes down to 30. So short cooldown for an ultimate, especially if you include cooldown reduction. You can use this quite frequently. And again, I'm assuming the cooldowns are shared between the 3 summons. So yeah, I think leveling this is very worth it in that regard. Summon Beast is the secondary one, which spawns a Kusariki who stands at the target location and doesn't really move around. And then if only specifically an enemy guard comes to close, he charges, slows, and attacks them. The charge does up to 90 base damage plus 20% scaling, and then the basic attacks do 35 damage plus 15% scaling. So they do a little bit more damage than the serpents, but still not an insane value by any stretch of imagination. However, it applies an 80% slow for 1 second. And this I think is interesting since you can use it to set up your 2. So you can set up the slow, utilize the slow to set up the stun, then apply some more damage. Or you can use it to set up your 1 as well a little bit. If you time it right, so that you use it right when they dash, that's when like you charge up your 1, and then right when the dash is, then you hit them with your 1. So that could confirm it. This has a lifetime of 30 seconds, so this sticks around for a while as well. And again, shares the same cooldown values as the serpents here. The third one is Summon Storm, which, to be honest, isn't really a creature in my opinion. Well, they call it a creature, I guess, but it's just a storm that moves towards the enemy slowly. So it deals 30-90 damage plus 30% magic power scaling. But then it has additional tick damage, 10 to 30 plus 10% scaling every 0.4 seconds for 4 seconds. This is pretty interesting. This ability knocks up enemies as well, so it's a second CC here. But again, something you can likely, usually not use in combination with the beast, with the slow. And then, yeah, it just follows the enemy. I think you can probably get out of it fairly easily. It didn't look that fast, so you're probably not going to take the full damage of this. And I think because of the slow travel time of the thing itself, you might even miss out on being hit by some of the initial damage of it, or some of the ticks that happen before you get hit. So I think this is not like the highest burst ability or anything in that regard. It's just an additional CC, I guess, maybe some self-peel as well. That can be used in combination with the other setup that she has. And that brings us to her secondary form, her melee form, which first ability here is Consume. This comes with 60 to 200 damage, plus 60% magical power scaling, not the highest damage value here again. This applies a slow, a 25% slow per 1.5 seconds. So another slow here, but not nearly as good as the beast slow. So just a little bit of a benefit, really. If you were to swap over right after that, I don't know if you get a charge off in the slow time, but I doubt it. So more a setup for this form. And this comes with an execute for minions and jungle monsters. So you can use this to consume targets. You can use this to immediately consume her serpent and beast pets by using the ability on them, and get hardened scales from that. It doesn't actually specify here if you get hardened scales from consuming minions through the execute. Not sure if it's just a quicker clear or if it actually does something in that regard. Anyways, The other part of it is that you can consume a buff holder. If you do that, then you will immediately get the buff from the buff holder, but the original buff still drops in place, which means one of your allies can pick up the buff as well. And this is something that's very interesting, that's very debated at the moment. For jungle, it doesn't actually make a difference. Zifroli pointed this out to me, that on level 1 you won't have this ability, so the start won't really change, since you will effectively end up not having consume or not having your stance, or like you'd have to level your stance swap on level 1, and if you level your stance swap, then you can't get consume. So that doesn't actually change anything. But then on later stages it might change something, and you might get a secondary buff for jungling, while in mid lane, of course, you can drop something for your allies and all that type of stuff. So it is interesting. We'll see how much of it will be a gimmick or not. The interesting thing for Tiamat specifically is that she can have a consumed and a regular buff. So you can, for example, run her in jungle with mana buff and speed buff if you wanna at later stages get some extra MP5 for clearing, or with mana buff and power buff if you wanna aggress more enemies, and that type of stuff really. So that's a lot of interesting stuff to be done there. It also has a very short cooldown, which is interesting because again, this is what you level first in the mage stance, I think. So 12 down to 8 seconds, and that kind of offsets the relatively low damage a little bit, because if you get that down to whatever 4 or 5 seconds ish with like Bambas or whatever in jungle, then maybe it's a bit of a different story. But we'll have to see. And then we have Outburst, slamming the ground, creating Seismic Rifts, which is basically just a gradual knock up in some stages. Basically, it looks like Herc's 2, but it acts more like Pele's 2, only in a line in front of her. 50 to 170 damage plus 50% of your magical power, so also not the highest damage here, once again, a little bit more for the CC, and cooldown from 14 to 10 seconds. So what I find really interesting is that the higher ranks of all of her abilities come with relatively short cooldowns, excluding the stance swap, obviously. But you can actually go through a lot of abilities very quickly, and maybe this sometimes encourages you to stay in one stance as well, since obviously you have short cooldowns there. So we'll see about that. Then we have Rising Flight, which is a backwards leap that deals damage to enemies in front of you. Kind of think of it like Neath Leap, basically. And this returns into a mage flying stance, which deals 40 damage to 200 damage with 40% scaling and 40 mana cost, not that high again. And the cooldown here, again, 22 to 14 seconds. So this is, again, something I think you want to prioritize just to swap around a lot. And then last but not least, there is her ultimate, Tempest of Undoing. Tiamat causes a celestial outburst around here, dealing initial damage and damage over time effect to every enemy nearby. Tiamat also gains a hardened scale per enemy guard hit. And this, I think, is like the big deal when it comes to getting hardened scales up, because this is how you really get a lot of them very quickly if there's a lot of enemies around. And this is what encourages her to play aggressive as a bruiser as well, just like go in and get those stacks. And you get a 60 to 180 damage plus 30% of your magical power, an additional burn damage here of 10 to 50 plus 5% of your magical power every 0.5 seconds. Damage absolutely not insane on this ability, especially for an ultimate. Even with the burn included, it's still, yeah, relatively low for most ults, I would say. What's really interesting here is that the cooldown is only 20 seconds. I don't know if this is intended, but this means you can get these stacks quite frequently, and if you get cooldown reduction, then this would be very spammable. So I don't know if there's a typo here or if this is actually meant to be that way, because that, I think, is more scary than her stance swapping and everything. Like I just think that if you were to go CDR heavy, again, jungle Bombas, and just swap between Consume Outburst and then her ultimate, that I think might be more concerning than some other things that people have been thinking about, especially if you get in a Spear of Desolation as well, and then there's maybe one enemy that dies, and then you just get all your hardened scale stacks again. It could be very tanky, and a lot of consistent damage that way. I know that a lot of people think that she's very overpowered because she has a lot of abilities. I don't think she's very overpowered because she has a lot of abilities. I think if she is overpowered, it's more because of things like Tempest of Undoing being on a short cooldown, Consume being on a short cooldown, her Children of Creation coming with Summon Serpents, which has 30% extra damage reduction on top of the 60% that she gets from here, which means she can effectively also reach 100% damage reduction, like if you throw in some other items. It could be interesting, like what she does in solo in that regard as well. I think those are things to be more concerned about than her having a lot of abilities. Again, we'll break this down in more detail in the next video, because I think this is too much to go through in very in-depth detail. But yeah, I think there are some interesting mechanics at play here, and we'll see how they work, how they go, how it goes for her. All I'm thinking is that you want CDR on her all the time just to spam your abilities. That's all I know. And with that, we move on to the other parts of the patch, which are also very interesting. Way already 45 minutes. Sandy Voodoo Rock skin, super cool. We got a Varman skin that doesn't even look like Varman at all, which is also cool. We got Shishen Pizza Shivalanke, which is long requested and really cool. We got a really cool Arachne skin as well. Wild Slime Mulan, which I was initially thinking doesn't look that cool, but actually looks pretty cool in terms of the effects that we've seen so far. And they talked about some other effects about her having a skateboard and stuff, so that should be pretty neat. Northern Water Capri, also really, really cool. And then the recolors here for Tiamat. So skin-wise, once again, this patch just knocks it out of the park. And then here we have the... the Shivalanke skin here is the new viewer store skin for reaching 500 points. You don't have to buy it, you just have to get enough viewer points. Whereas the Varman one is the one you buy, and Samdi is the one you get for getting the pass. Then we have the release schedule here. February 9 is the bonus update, and February 23 we get Tiamat, because I know a lot of people are going to ask this question. February 23. And then there's the bonus update in March, which, yeah, we can hear about later. So now we have a lot of quality of life things and everything, and there's going to be some stuff in here that I think is actually very important, very interesting. So the first one here is that aura items have been mislabeled. So they'll now say aura when they're aura items, and otherwise they'll say passive, so that you know what is an aura, which is specifically important for Ares. And Not Brawling gets some extra info as well, and Roll Trade has a bit more of a cooldown, so you can't spam it. And then we have some changes to the viewer pass. So now you have to, now you can watch any Smite channel to get viewer points, but you have to claim the viewer points on Twitch first, which has like a progress in your profile now. That is how basically every drop works now. Like Twitch has just changed their system, I guess, to not constantly overload like the API by having to update everything, is what I'm assuming is going on. So yeah, things change in that regard, but you can also earn points differently. You can earn up to 8,750 points per week cap if you claim all the 4-hour gold drops. I don't know if there's a point where you have to claim them. This might be something you have to pay a lot more attention to. It might be that you like have to claim them once per week, which would be very annoying. But we'll find out about that. I guess it just refreshes or something. But yeah, pay attention to that either way. And yeah, then there's the new rewards, everything else, blah, blah, blah. Some of the old rewards stay for now, so you can still buy them for a while until they get replaced by the new skins later in the year. And there are also other rewards that you can get. The voting tab and teams tab are hidden until the Season 8 teams are revealed. The free rewards system is now also rolled out. If you watch ads, then you get stuff. They changed one of the chests, but it has the same rewards, which is because the Odyssey is over. So they renamed it to free rewards chest. So pretty nice stuff here for those of you who want to get free rewards by watching ads or get free skins by watching streams. That both works. Then we have a lot of fixes. Freya fixed an issue where she could do more damage than intended with Mannequin Scepter, which I am assuming is tied to the basic attack damage. So we'll have to find out what's going on with that now. I'm actually very curious about this. Afro, an issue where love bits were hitting enemies who are outside the internet area. You saw this in one of my videos maybe, where I actually got like hit like way back, like miles behind the tower, and suddenly died. That's fixed. Gem of Focus would make you take more damage instead of less damage, which is absolutely horrible. Gem of Focus, by the way, also really interesting contender for Tiamat, obviously. If you're playing her in mid, I think this will be the item that you're going for, because you get even more damage reduction and a lot more damage. Yeah, Jungle Conqueror mechanic, those unintended removed on Conquest. I didn't even see that. I don't even know what that is. And these were all, yep, fine. There's a Rage issue, which lost power. Where it lost 10 power, which was not meant to have when it evolved, because it basically wasn't updated yet. And some back-end fixes as well. So now, there was something in here as well. Let me just quickly skim through it because there are some things that are not that important really. Some outdated MMR stuff, so if you're wondering about that, that's fixed now. And the global healing reduction wasn't, no, it was not quite applied consistently. It was working wrong with some like mana heals and stuff. So this should now only apply to HP healing and abilities from lifesteal. And the conquest changes here are in regards to the scorpions. So timer precision was increased for the jungle camp. I don't even know if that's a good or bad thing. But the scorpions here scaled the jungle, the greater scorpion in the jungle, the one that gives you extra buffs, scaled too fast. They scaled faster than intended, but then they stopped scaling at 10 minutes. So they will be fixed now. So they will definitely be tanky in late game, but maybe not quite as tanky in early game. And I'm assuming they might have tweaked their XP and gold values as well because they were kind of weird and glitchy. Maybe that was in combination with the scaling as well. Maybe they scaled up too quickly and that's why their gold values changed so quickly. And they no longer have a health HUD bar like the Fire Giant, which is not meant, they were not meant to have. And the lesser Scorpion was scaling much slower than intended, so that's why it got so easy to kill at later stages. So that is also fixed. So they will probably feel a little bit different. Pay attention to that. This one is very interesting. I was talking about this in my Conquest stuff, in my Conquest starts. The Void Camp is fixed and Alpha Chimera has a scaling changed in terms of XP. 6 less XP than before, which was specifically what you needed to hit an extra level on the first minion in the wave if the support held the smalls. That is no longer the case, which I'm assuming will mean that the support holding the smalls will probably not make a difference. Either way, I'm going to look into that and we're just going to go through that in detail. I have to talk about some solo and jungle stuff anyway, so we'll just talk about the stats in general a little bit more with all the changes that are being applied. And yeah, we have some base door issues, which is like rotating the doors and then animating in the wrong direction, but I think that doesn't actually change anything. The speed and mana camp will no longer be aggressive. Trees will no longer let you clip into them, which is good. And like the general collision is fixed a little bit on some walls. And fixed order base archers not to block guard vision while using aerial ultimates. So yeah, fixed it not to block. I'm assuming it's not going to block. And there was, no, this is all AI stuff. Here, we got the Izanami. Izanami can no longer attack towers from outside of range because she got an additional bit of range before, which was not intended. Barcos Brawling, this is like a lot of cards that have like brawling fixes where the meters didn't go up properly. Barcos, Drunken Salts, Heat. Erlang Shen's turtle farm will now actually get a shield if cancelled early. I think this happened to me on PTS before. I think that I was wondering about this. That explains a lot. And there was an issue with Bakasura could eat wards, that's fixed. There is an issue where Fafnir's 3 could not deal damage or CC, which must be really frustrating. And and Baba Yaga's ultimate gets a nerf where it will no longer chase stealth units. That's unfortunate. And then this one is again very important. Janos re-implemented the change to his 1. This ability will now allow for Janos and his allies to hit allow for Janos and any enemies hit by the banish CC to be a hit as they fall after exiting the portal. Wait, I thought it's not for Janos. Janos and enemies will not be hittable while entering the portal though. Wait, they nerfed it again? Oh, I thought they just straight up changed it for him individually. Oh boy. Well, okay, so this might still be okay if you can time it right. But so what the problem with this was that you could go into the portal to juke damage, and while you're going into the portal and you're dropping down, you shouldn't be targetable, you would still be targetable. So if Thanatos dunks down on you, you just, go into your portal and you avoid it before, and that didn't work anymore. But now it'll work again, but only if you time it very precisely, it seems. Since you have to do it on the initial part where you're falling into the portal and not after you drop down, which is only a very brief time frame. So you really have to time that right with the enemy execute, otherwise you'll still get hit. But this should still benefit Janos more than the enemy because you have more control over that part, right? You have more control over Janos when exactly you go into your own portal rather than when the enemy is like, you know, in the portal. And it still sets up his own combo better that way. But then again, I don't really think he needs that at the moment because his 2 is super easy to hit anyways. Such an easy to hit ability. Janos actually, by the way, really overrated in terms of performance. A lot of people thought that he was going to be super, super good. He's going to be top tier, blah, blah, blah. He's not. He's still under 50% win rate in every rank except gold. And only there he's like slightly above 50%. So yeah, a lot of changes that benefited him actually, like item changes, map changes and all that. Still not enough to put him all that high. And I don't think this change will make the big difference there either. Then we have another very important change in my opinion, which is Bamba's Hammer. Fix an issue where guards could hit allies, who could hit allies or other objects to trigger this effect. Paired with this fix, the item will be re-enabled for all guardians now. So what this was about was Yemoja healing allies and getting the proc for the reset, and in her case it doesn't just reset the cooldowns or lower the cooldowns, it restores her Omi. This will be possible again by hitting enemies, and this, I really want to stress this. This will no longer be possible by healing your allies. You cannot heal spam your allies and basic attack them in between and get the stacks back. But this will still work by attacking enemy guards. And I think other objects also state means that it will no longer proc on towers probably. I'm assuming because that was also a little bit janky, wonky in my opinion. And I think this is still very interesting for Yemoja now. Like, as long as you're able to hit some stuns, hit some bubbles, and hit some basics, I don't think you'll have a major problem here. I think you'll still spam abilities and you still get a ton of Omi back. Not as much as before, of course, but still plenty. I would still say it's definitely going to be sufficient. And then there's some other stuff there with Bambas that makes it very interesting. So, very curious to see how this one plays out. I'm going to run some Yemoja jungle and see how it's out of the nerf. Death Temper fixed an issue where this was not providing the bonus basic attack damage, so that was on top of the range issue, so this really was struggling, so it should be a completely different item now, basically. Divine Ruin and Brawlers were intended to apply 30% reduced healing, but the patch notes state that it applies 35%, and Toxic Blade is the same issue except 15% versus 20% of the nodes. That's awkward, because that means if you hit an enemy with this, they get the same amount of anti-heal applied as if they're in the brawling state. So really, well, you're still applying damage to them, obviously, so it benefits to some degree. But especially with Toxic Blade, you have to be careful now. If you hit an enemy with a Toxic Blade shot, they actually heal more. You have to hit them with 2 shots, because otherwise they will heal for, well, 85% instead of 70%. Obviously, they still take damage from that one shot, but still something to pay attention to, I would say. Spartan Flag had an issue with the passive responding on the enemy's location instead of the owner's location. I thought it was meant to be that way, but I guess. Infused Sigil, if the owner was CC'd at the same time as gaining the last stack, the explosion would not detonate, making a bad item even worse, really, so that's a good fix. And Sacrificial Shroud, this is basically when you had a guard like I think it was mainly Hera, where if you use Sacrificial Shroud on Hera and you send Argus onto an enemy, every time you send it, you will lose health. And that's obviously not the way it's meant to be. So it'll no longer deal damage on toggles or on abilities that could be refired. I'm assuming this might apply to like Raging Ultimate as well or something. We'll find out. I wonder if this changes something for Blood-Soaked Shroud as well, but I don't know. We'll find out about that as well. Blood-Soaked Shroud, by the way, very interesting option for Tiamat maybe as well. Okay, game modes. The Invader's Curse is getting slight adjustments. Basically, it doesn't go through walls as much anymore. It now covers the back harpies, and the active time only goes until 35 seconds into the game. So after that, you are free to invade. So it's basically just the first buff camps, and then you can go. Lesser Scorpion will no longer have its unique effect, essentially. Like right now, you have to hold it in this down state to get the HP 5. That is no longer the case. Instead, now it activates an aura of healing around its leash radius for the team that slays it, and only when it's fully slain. And only for the team that slays it. This aura lasts for 10 seconds and provides a healing buff. The healing buff provides you with 10 health per second. and it lasts for 3 seconds, but it refreshes if you stay in the area. So if you stay for the full duration, you get up to 130 max HP. Up to 130 HP max, sorry. And that's only like assuming you stay there the full time. The base stats are also adjusted here. The physical protection is reduced from 6 to 2, magic protection from 2 to 6, increased from 2 to 6. Physical power is increased from 28 to 34, and the XP reward is reduced from 41 to 21. So a lot less rewarding to take this down, really. The reward really comes from the sustained part of it now. So if you get early pressure, there's less value in it now. And I think this is actually pretty impactful for the dual lane meta as well, because I figured there could be some benefit in having a high pressure comp. I think this takes a fair bit of the benefit away. And then the max health is decreased from plus 180 to plus 120, I'm guessing, per stage. So yeah, some changes there. Speed buff, my favorite change of the patch, no longer provides control reduction, but now provides an additional 5% flat movement speed. So 10% movement speed plus the effect, which is up to 6%. Very happy with that change. Very, very, very happy. Glad they listened. And now speed buff is a speed buff again. And now it's also more on par with the other upgrades, really. And now it's more like it's more useful to go to solo light side as a jungler and do both of these upgrades, whereas before it felt like you're doing this to give the solo laner his 20% CDR, which is huge, but you're not really getting much out of it. So Conquest, that's the new updated spectator version as well, and some map changes to the walls around the fire giant and stuff like that. Some visibility changes really for globals as well. Nothing too crazy, but some changes and some more decoration. Then there are some more item changes as well. Gilded Arrow, this item should no longer mark jungle bosses, which means that you won't have to waste your time clearing them in order to get rid of the mark, essentially. No. But this obviously is something that you wouldn't really want the mark on. You want to have it on easier to kill targets, so that makes sense. Mannequin Scepter, we talked about, this gets in a secondary nerf here. So apparently it was dealing magical damage rather than physical damage. I don't know if this is always the case, but if it was for everyone, then it may have pretty drastic impacts, because usually most characters have more physical than magical defense in early game especially. So we'll see how exactly that works and who that applies for. That might also be why they may have not nerfed it that much, but I am not sure. It doesn't really specify, because it's just an issue. It doesn't say if it's for everyone. And then the attack speed slow is reduced from 7% to 3.5% per stack, which means it's going down from a total reduction of 28% to 14%, which is still some reduction, but a lot easier to box into, especially if you're not heavily focused on attack speed yourself. So yeah, I think, again, I've talked about why I think mannequins should be nerfed differently, but I think these changes in themselves are, or this change in itself is fine. And then we have some guard balance. Like I said, Danzaburou is still like top 3 ADC at the moment, but not crazy overperforming. And so he's going to get a little bit of a nerf here with the power scaling of the rocket going down from 110% to 100%, which is completely fine, in my opinion. I still see him more as a jungler, so I don't think he needs the extra scaling there. But that's just me. I see everything as a jungler, but especially Danzaburou. And yeah, I think after this nerf, he'll probably be in a solid place. I think he'll be like ending up around 50% win rate, even maybe slightly lower in higher ranks. Find out about that. But I do think that's good changes overall. And like just looking at where we started with him and where he's now in terms of overall nerfs, I think it's quite a good path that they have chosen there, which is gradually going down, but not too slowly compared to others. It's like the third set of nerfs he's getting, I think. One targeted at damage, then one targeted at the sounds and stuff. We'll see, like, if his 2 maybe get some nerfs in the future, but outside of that, I think, yeah, he has some strong abilities still. His 3 and his 2 especially are very strong, but that doesn't seem to be as problematic at this point when there are pretty solid counters to him as well. King Arthur had some glitch where he could proc item effects with his basic attacks, similar to Yamagander. He's not supposed to do that, so that should not happen anymore. Baba Yaga gets the entirety of a 2 produced in pre-fires and post-fires. So the entire animation of the 2, of the wind-up of the 2, and what how quickly you can do something afterwards, that's all sped up, which I think is very nice, very beneficial here. And this is also true for the swaps of things. I think Baba Yaga's in a very rough place, so maybe this will help a little bit, just to, feel more responsive and not so clunky. Yamuganda's basic attacks no longer used by items that have flat reduction. This is kind of interesting because they already took the flat reduction of Warrior's X, but it may help him fight into mannequins a little better. The flat reduction still applies to his 1, so it's not like you're not benefiting against him at all, but it's just because his basic attacks are so unique and get countered so hard because there's so many ticks that they decided to change that, which I think is reasonable. And the immovable damage taken debuff is decreased from 15 to 10%, so he takes less damage if he gets CC'd, which like was abused against him a fair bit, since you can like apply a CC and then they just really go in on him and do a lot of damage to him very quickly with some guards. I don't really like this change because I think that 15% in return to being immune to a ton of CCs is quite reasonable, especially when you're also a character that has a long CC immune or targetable immune ultimate. So I think this is not really the change that he needed or that should have been done. I think I would have rather seen some damage tweaks or something than that. Yeah, that's just my take. I can see why they did it. I think it was reasonable to give him some small buffs, which they have done now. I think it should have been different buffs, or it should have been a different buff. This one I'm kind of like whatever about. Kunonos Shifter Season Summer Heat gets the scaling increased from 5% to 10%, which is quite nice. A little bit of extra damage on every basic, yeah. And Autumn Decay increased the protection debuff from 5 to 25 to 10 to 26. So really more the early ranks that get extra benefits. And the duration, which I think is very interesting as well, increased from 5 to 7 seconds. So there really is a lot more benefit in throwing one additional initial basic with Autumn Decay on a target that you look in the box and then switching to somebody afterwards for maximum damage, because it'll do more at the early ranks and it'll last longer, which makes it a lot easier to use, and I think that's very valuable. Obviously, I think Kunonos is in a rough place overall, and I don't know if this is gonna be enough to change that, but I do think that these are pretty significant changes in some regards. Odin, Ring of Spears changed duration from 4 to 6 seconds to 5 seconds at all ranks. Additionally, enemies inside the ring now have their power reduced by 15%, and it doesn't say that here, but basically the attack speed reduction doesn't exist now. I think, let me check again just to make sure, because I'm getting lost. I think they were talking about the attack speed reduction. I'm not even sure if it's still in the current version, but the more important thing about this is that he deals extra, like when you level the ult, the 2 points that you get are the cooldown reduction currently, and he deals extra damage when an enemy leaps out, which is really not like that common, and it's not that useful compared to other damaging abilities. So I think there's just no reason to level this anymore. Wait, no, I can't. Yeah, it seems like they already took the attack speed slow away. It still has a movement slow, but yeah. Now it has a movement slow and it has a power reduction. So you can't box him as easily. I thought it actually still had the attack speed slow, but no, it already didn't. And that is why they give it that now. So yeah, like really a 1.1 wonder now. But that's not necessarily bad. It's Odin. It's ultimate. Like it's always been a 1.1 to some degree at least. I think this will probably not drastically change anything for Odin. I think Odin still has a bit of a tough one in the current meta, but I am kind of thinking that maybe with this and everything else, like a tankier Bombas Hammer Odin could also be interesting again. You know. But the problem for him is really that, like, if you use the Bird Bomb combo, this might not work too well. I don't know. I haven't actually tested what happens if you use the shield first, then the basic, and then jump afterwards. I think that should work to get 2 stacks still. But it's a bit awkward. Still interesting overall. But yeah, I don't quite know how things will go for Odin. Because the other upgrades, the other starters, don't really do that much from either, unless, like, you want to go into maybe the jungler's eye thingo, and then you're kind of back to putting him in solo, and then in solo he's not doing all too great either. So yeah, I don't know if this will be enough for him. I think Odin is still in a bit of a rough place, unless you're in a really good counter matchup. And then the one that shall not be named, Dispel Magic, increased slow from 20% at all ranks to 20 to 30%, and increased shield health from 50 to 230 to 50 to 270. So yeah, just a little bit more CC and survivability here really, which I think is reasonable because she is pretty gankable, she's pretty targetable. So yeah, I think those are reasonable changes. Overall, very good patch in my opinion. A lot of good changes, a lot of interesting changes. I'm a bit surprised that Apollo didn't get changed. I'm a bit surprised that Yemoja didn't get changed, which I feel like is also very strong, but then she kind of got changed through Sentinel's Embrace anyways. And there's always a problem of level of play and performance with Yemoja. So that might just be a personal bias as well. But we'll see. There's still a lot of things to figure out with the next patch. I think we'll still figure out a lot of things with these starters that will ultimately change how they perform and how they get used. But for now, I think this is a good set of changes to get into 8.2. I don't expect the game to be perfectly balanced one patch into the season. And yeah, I hope that they keep up this direction, which I personally am very happy with. And that's it for today. Again, tomorrow we're going to look more into Tiamat in greater detail when it comes to her abilities and how that all works together and everything, as far as we can find out things before PTS goes live. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, click the sub button, maybe the bell to get notified of that Tiamat video and other upcoming Smite videos. We obviously look at Tiamat on the weekend as well. A quick reminder here to download PTS if you want to play on the weekend and maybe join the Discord. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. Duke Sloth, out.